Why is it that some drawing subjects feel like they're hard and other drawing subjects feel like they're easy? Why is this? In my experience, it comes down to having an inadequate understanding of what the drawing process is, and the perhaps too limited understanding we have works for some subjects but not for others. And I think one of the most common but inadequate ways of thinking of the drawing process is that when we draw, we're basically drawing lines around shapes to capture the same shape. And this is understandable because this very much comes from the sorts of drawings that we first see as children, our school drawings and the children's books that we flick through and have read to us, and the cartoons we watch and the comics we read as well. A lot of very simplified shapes that are easily outlined, and for most of us when we first start drawing, we're copying these very simplified outline-based drawings that we see. Now, the problem with this is that while this works for simplified hard-edged shapes, it doesn't work so well for things like clouds, waves, hair, leaves, grass, particularly the abundance of nature. Because so much of what we see doesn't have a hard line around the edge of it. That's not the visual appearance that we see. Because hard edges are great for shapes that we could cut out and arrange in a pattern. But hard outlines often don't capture the feel of what we're seeing when we're looking at a three-dimensional form. Even a sphere, because we're not looking at a corner, we're looking at a shape, at a surface that is slowly curving away from us, that we lose sight of gradually. And a hard, heavy circle outline way of drawing that doesn't capture that sense of three-dimensionality of movement. So how do we draw if we're not outlining shapes? How do we draw if instead of focusing on flat two-dimensional images that we seek to reproduce with our pen or our pencil or whatever, we're trying to see the three-dimensional form, particularly if it's a complex form, and capture that? Let me show you in this demonstration. Well, I've actually started showing you already, but let me explain what I'm doing and the thinking process that changes everything. And while I'm drawing trees in this demo, I could just as easily be doing hair on a head or fur on an animal, or clouds in the sky, or waves in the sea. All subjects where we can't easily outline a shape, and which therefore we see of as hard. But if we understand a drawing process that works for any three-dimensional form, then while some drawing subjects may take more time to do, the basic understanding, the way we draw, doesn't change. And so drawings may take more commitment, but they're not harder or easier than each other. So what am I talking about? If we're not outlining shapes, what are we doing? Well, firstly, I stop thinking about lines and I think about marks, but I have several other videos on that, so I don't want to focus on that too much, except you can see now, and I want to point this out at this very early stage of this drawing, you can see now that whereas perhaps once upon a time I would have started to outline the trees, outline the edge of the canopy that we can see, that's not something I do anymore. And I've used a series of dotted lines to help me just position where they are relative to each other. Not worried about a sense of close or far, nearness or distance, although in my finished drawing I'm going to want to capture that sense that some trees are closer and some are further away, because when we think of form and three dimensions, we're not just thinking of any one object, we're also thinking of objects in relation to other objects. Some move towards us in space, some move away from us in space, and some are far distant, such as that mountain in the top right corner. So I want to find marks that will let me draw, and let me say directly in pen. There's no pencil outline in here, no pencil marks at all. This is directly in ink, so every bit of ink I put on the paper will still be there at the end. So I want to navigate my way through this scene because I do want to copy it fairly accurately with the picture. I chose this photo as a reference and cropped it because I like it. And so I want to capture in my drawing the things I liked in this scene. So I do want to just not put trees anywhere, but I want to capture these trees in this relationship with each other with this lighting. So I need to find marks for all of that. And you can see, and bearing in mind that every mark will be on the paper at the end, but not every mark will be particularly noticeable at the end. And that's why I've done these dotted outlines to help me position the trees, because I know from experience that they won't be visible at the end. So they let me see where things are going without compromising the effect I'm going to create at the end. Because this is another way of my thinking. I'm not trying to draw outlines of shapes. I'm trying to create a certain visual effect. When we look at these trees, they appear to us in a certain way, which is created by how far we are from them, perhaps their color, where the light is, what the surface texture is, and the components and how they're positioned together in relationship with each other. All of these things, and whether there's a fog or a mist or whatever, all of these things create the effect of how we see them. And if I were to take another photo, maybe during a storm at dawn, the effect of what we see would be very different, despite the fact it's the same object. So it's a visual effect I'm trying to capture. And that may include shape and outline. And a line may be the best way to do that. If you look at that fence, that barbed wire fence in the foreground, you'll notice I did lines there because lines are the best marks to use to capture that. But for so much here, lines are inadequate. And instead, I'm going to use marks, but I'm not using marks so much to outline shapes. I'm using marks to capture the lights and darks that we have here, the values. If you hear the word values being used in drawing, values just means the lights and darks. When we look at things in life, the values can be affected by color, or our perception can be affected by color. But the difference between a photo of just values and a normal photo is we take all the color out. And it's great to spend some time doing that on our phones with various photos to see what the values, what the lights and darks look like without the color differential. But if you look at what I'm doing now, I'm basically hatching, because I don't want to create a three-dimensional form by outlining a hard edge that we don't see in life. And this tree I'm doing now, if we look at the photo, we can see it's visually has a very soft edge. And that's partly because the values are similar, so they merge in with each other a little bit, but it's also because of the underlying form of the tree, the rather complex three-dimensional arrangement of the branches and the leaves. And a hard line would create visually a very strong, sharp edge that we don't have when we look at this in life. Now, if we look at that tree that at the moment is just a white gap in the middle, we can actually understand that we mostly see that tree very clearly, but we mostly see it and understand it because of the dark values behind it and the light that's hitting that tree, providing a strong contrast with the leaves a bit further back that are in shadow. Now, some of those leaves are a darker green as well, which increases the impact of this. That create a different visual effect compared to the leaves on that tree on the left-hand side, where the background is not high contrast in. Now, because I'm an artist and I'm not a photocopier, I can manipulate what I see to create more distinction or more interest in my drawing. I don't have to be a slave to what's here. But I've chosen the photo because I like the way the parts mostly work together. So I want to capture the effect of those parts. And there are so few hard edges beyond that fence in the foreground and perhaps a couple of the branches. There are very few hard edges. It's a series of forms merging into other forms where we have shadows and sometimes direct sunlight and at other times bouncing sunlight. And this is what I'm wanting to create. So you can see now that with that white space tree in the center, it's not quite as much white space now as it was, but you can see that I'm really drawing that by the hatching lines that come in behind it. And because they're hatching lines, and in a sense it's the tip of each line which is defining the tree, I can get a much softer feel, far more capturing the feel in real life than if I drew a continuous outline around it. Even if it was a very complex outline shape of the line wiggled in and out around each little cluster of leaves that we can see, it would still have had a heaviness that we don't get in life. That's not the effect of this tree at this distance in this lighting. And I want to capture that effect. So we don't think of lines to outline shapes that are going to look very flat and two-dimensional, but we're thinking of marks to create three-dimensional forms and to capture the visual effect of those forms based on their surfaces, things, I mean, not so much with trees, but with old stone buildings. Often the edges are very weathered and rounded and chipped. And again, a hard straight edge is not going to capture that weathered feel. And it's this oversimplification that relying on drawing lines around shapes creates that it is, and the effect that creates that makes our drawings so often look cartoon-like. Now, this drawing, you're actually watching it at 3 times my drawing speed. It took me just over an hour to draw in actual drawing time. So if you want to get almost a sense of the real time, use that cog icon and hit the half speed video play button, not a button, icon. And you'll see it almost at the time it took me to draw it. And please hit the like button for me if you're finding this interesting. And if this idea of drawing the effect of detail interests you, and if you'd like to see it applied to dozens of different subjects, then I have a Drawing the Effects of Detail playlist. And one of those videos was actually my channel's breakout video. And that was capturing the detail of a field of wildflowers. But now I'm becoming, probably besides the fence, the closest I'm coming to drawing shapes, this type of pine tree in the midground, very dark green, very distinctive foliage pattern of these clumps of dark green pine needles at the end of long branching branches, and there's several of them layered back from each other. But even so, I'm resisting the urge to draw a blob and colour it in, which would be an outline approach, an outline way of thinking, creating in effect a dark flat shape. I'm still wanting to use marks to create the effect of what they're seeing, and that effect will include the way the light hits it, and that will impact how it looks and hopefully capture a sense of 3 dimensions. But the other thing, of course, that we need to realize is that the effect of what we see is not caused by any one part. It's not caused by any one object or one tree in this case. It's how all the components work together. Notice with my hatching what I'm doing. Pay particular attention to the way I at times layer the hatching on top of earlier hatching, and other times I don't, and I leave it hatched rather than cross-hatched. And it's all about the effect I'm trying to create. And sometimes the focus of that effect is simply the darkness of that part of the scene, the light and dark, and I want to make it darker, so I layer over the top more. Sometimes it's because I'm trying to suggest the underlying form. I'm actually trying to capture a sense of the 3-dimensionality, either instead of or as well as the light and dark. And so I'll angle the hatching lines to indicate the flow of roundedness or otherwise, depending what the form is. So how do you think it's going? Please hit that like button if you haven't. I would love to hear a comment if this is a new way of thinking or if it's one that you've tried before. If you've looked at my playlist, please recommend a video from the Drawing the Effect of Detail playlist, that one that others perhaps could look at. If you find my channel helpful, don't underestimate your ability to help my channel by leaving comments and sharing the videos with your friends who draw. And if you look at what I'm doing, I'm actually looking at the reference photo. I'm trying to just see the values now and capture those values, the lights and the darks. I'm actually not so much thinking of trees as these merging indistinct or distinct blobs of lights and darks. And this is a particularly good subject if you're not overly familiar with values, to use a phone app to desaturate, to take the color out and to see it in black and white. And I will post this on my channel posts page, the old community page. And that way, if you want to have a go drawing this, you'll have a better reference copy to draw from. You can screenshot that and then you can, if you want, take the color out of it. So please take advantage of that. This is the way, though, fundamentally, I draw all my trees. Again, I mentioned at the start how these dotted outlines weren't going to be super obvious at the end, and you can see how that's the case now. If I hadn't pointed them out for you to look at, you probably would barely be seeing them. And notice here just how lightly the effect can be, and where a value joins another value with high contrast, that's always something to accentuate, to pay a little more attention to. The other thing is heavier, darker values and marks will feel closer than lighter ones. And if I want to have a really dark value some distance away, I find that it works better to use a lighter pen. And you can see now I've switched to a 0.1. I've been using a 0.3 and a 0.2 up till now, but I've switched to a 0.1 to get some lighter, finer marks and to build up my darker values in a more subtle way, which in my experience lets me get a darker value further away that doesn't jump closer and skew our whole perception of depth. It's having a sense of the further things are further and then further and then further, which is so important in a panoramic scene such as this. So here we are. I'm adding a few more dotted lines here now because I'm going into a part of the drawing that I haven't overly worked out. The other thing that you can't see here is the time I'm pausing and looking at the reference. And in a few spots where there was a bit of a large chunk of time doing that, I've edited that out. But don't underestimate how much I'm looking back and forth. And if you do slow this down to half speed, and I would recommend, even if just for a few minutes that you do that, you would appreciate more the observation time. And a lack of appreciating how different observing to drawing is from observation that's very adequate for everyday life is, I think, one of our largest drawing problems. We think we can't draw a good likeness of what we're drawing from because we lack technical skills. In my personal experience and with drawing students, the real problem is that we start to draw before we've seen what we need to have seen to draw it well. And again, it's not just the actual thing I'm drawing, but it's where it is in relation to the other things that I have drawn or will need to draw. And so I position things badly, and that compromises my ability to capture the correct relationships and proportions and scale. And if we have scale problems and proportion problems, they're almost always because we haven't observed the scale and proportions clearly. Now here you see me aligning the top of that. Again, it would have been tempting, and many people might have drawn this by drawing a continuous line, because it is a shape that we can see quite clearly, this sort of mid-blue silhouette of the mountain. But just because we can see a clear silhouette doesn't mean that a continuous line is the best way to capture it, to get the effect of this mountain being the furthest thing that we are seeing. And we're in the final part of the drawing now, and this is where there's a lot of adjustment of the closer values, of the closer things, where we can start to make some of the closer things feel closer by increasing the values, the darkness of them. And particularly if in the mid values, in the middle greys that we're trying to create, because we're really creating shades of grey here, aren't we, with hatching. If there's too much in the middle, then that will all start just to merge into one mid-grey blob, and we won't be able to see the individual elements as much as we might want. And I can't take the ink off, I can't erase anything, but I can darken some of those mid values and get the same effect by pulling darker. And I always think that to have some very dark values really adds to the visual drama. And so now you see I'm starting to make these choices. I've switched back to my 0.2mm pen. These are Copic multiliners I've used for this drawing. And I'm now able to darken the values and create the effect that I'm seeing in the drawing. We do need to show restraint early on, because if we go too dark too quickly, then instead of having a lot of mid-greys that confuses things, we have too much dark value, and that will confuse things just in a darker way. So there's more pausing, you'll notice, and this is 3 times drawing speed. So those pauses that we can clearly see now are much longer in real life, where I'm looking back and forth, looking back and forth. But instead of trying to see the different forms and position them accurately, I'm really now just trying to see the relative lights and darks. So the lightest parts of my reference, are they the lightest parts of my drawing, and vice versa? Notice too, look at that barbed wire fence down the bottom on the left-hand side, where we have dark values behind it. See how I haven't drawn them through each other? I've actually left a very faint, what I call a halo, a little glow effect, by stopping the hatching just before it comes to that barbed wire line. And the most accurate way of doing that is to, instead of coming down from the top and hoping that I stop before I cross over the barbed wire, is to start at the bottom and flick the hatch lines upwards. And that way I can maintain a nice separation of ink from the line of the barbed wire and the ends of the hatching for the darker values behind. What do you think? Notice too, with that mountain up the top, I've still given some roundedness. It's actually a steep, pointy mountain, and the edges are quite deeply eroded. They are actually quite sharp edges. So I haven't wanted to do like a nice soft, gentle curve horizontally across the whole thing. I want to get a sense of the layering of the rock and the way it's weathering and the gullies that have been formed as well. And yet I've still tried to place my lines in a way that suggests some of the three-dimensional form. But really far things, always best to understate it, because we want them to sit right back. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this helpful. If we stop thinking of drawing as outlining shapes, then we're going to avoid the cartoon appearance that so often our drawings have. And if we think of marks to create values that capture form and edges more realistically, edges that may be three-dimensionally curving away from us, then suddenly every drawing, every subject becomes possible. And while one such as this might take more time than other things, the understanding of how it's going to be done and the techniques that I use are really no different than if I'm doing a single rose or even a single daisy. This technique, this way of thinking, will let me draw anything, and I hope it will you as well. So why not follow the link in the description, find the photo, and have a go drawing this, or maybe just even the bottom part, that closest tree with the barbed wire fence. I certainly had some fun. I hope you do too. I'm Stephen Travers. I'll see you next time. Bye.